might have been about back in the day. So congratulations on making it here. So this is Jen McDonald. I'm Dean Cron.
I'm sitting down for the first part because it's all Dean.
And we're here actually trying to weave it together some medical science. And actually medical science is a term that's kind of weird because medicine is part science and part craft, and I use craft instead of art. It's really more of a craft. And story is incredibly critical to human understanding and to actually remembering anything that we're going to say today. So we're going to try to weave together some medical science and some story. So who are we? I've been a psychiatrist for about 29 years, mostly addictions and eating disorders. I'm now I shouldn't have to read that off. I'm the chief of mental health services at the VA and direct the Addiction Psychiatry Fellowship. And Jen is graduated.
Yep, I'm a recent graduate of the fellowship. And now I practice, as you can see, in several different locations. I work at the VA, I work at Tellurian, and I work at New Start. All three of those are sort of addiction and counseling programs. So I'm kind of all over town, which I actually really like.
And if you knew Jen, you would have predicted that. So, at any rate, we're going to, are you guys pre-meds, pre-something else,
yeah. What brings you all here at 10:06 on a lovely Saturday morning?
What would you like to learn about? Because we have a plan, but
we're
we might have a better
plan.
plan. So
I say we start up in this corner. You people tell us who you are and what you're interested in. At least two of you have to speak before we can move on. It's a lot of pressure.
Come on, Ellie, start them off. Okay.
They all look at each other. I'm the one.
I'm a freshman and I'm pre-med.
How about the next row?
I'm a freshman that's pretty good as well, and I'm curious as to what the experts have to say, because I know in like middle school and high school they're like, drugs are bad, alcohols are bad, don't do it.
And
end of story.
And you know the outcome of that intervention that happens all over the country? They're kids who would probably not drink hardly anything anyway, drink even less, and the kids who are going to have problems have no effect. They might drink more. So, net, it doesn't do anything for alcohol or drug problems. So, okay, this side of the room.
Yeah, pressure's on.
I'm Emily. I'm a kinesiology major who's pre-med, and I guess I'm interested to see like she kind of said, like what the other side of things are. Like we kind of hear about students who like are in trouble, but we don't really hear about from the experts like what happens, what you guys do.
Okay.
All right. So what happens after you get in trouble, right? After the cops show up, and you're like, oh, now what? Folks.
Sure. I'm Aaron. I'm a sophomore. I'm pre-med as well. I have an open mind today, so whatever you guys have.
You know what? You brought up some, what do the experts do? One of the things I got to tell you is that the value of having been around this so long is that when I started out, there were two things that people did with people who had drug or alcohol problems. If you had an opiate problem, you went on methadone. If you had an alcohol problem, you went to AA. And maybe you did cannabis. That was it. You are now done with 1984 substance abuse interventions. That's it. Now we have, I don't know, maybe 15 kinds of evidence-based psychotherapies that help people stop drinking or using, and gosh, I don't know, at least 10 medicines that work with either alcohol, cocaine, opiates. So there's all, and then you put those together in various combinations, and there's a lot of different things to do. And the most important thing is there's a lot of different ways to recover. It used to be the house shelf, go to AA. And we now know that while AA is actually good for a percentage of people, the larger portion of people don't respond. So what else are you going to do? How are you going to knock, if 34% of people get quite a bit better in AA, what do you do for the other 66%? And so there are a lot of different ways to get better, and we should talk about that as we go along.
I think we should have one or two more people comment on what they're interested in and who they are.
I'm Caitlin. I'm also a pre-med and sophomore. Just kind of interested in hearing what you guys have to say and possibly hearing new opinions.
So, the
I'm a mechanical engineer.
What?
Yeah.
What are you doing here?
Her boyfriend.
I knew it. I almost asked. I was like,
But-
who's he dating?
But one of my mom's friends was alcoholic in college. I want to be able to relate to him a little more and know what he went through. So.
Very good. All right, people who came in late, you have no say in what we talk about. You're relegated to just eating bagels.
So anyway, so we're going to alternate between science and story, trying to figure out a little bit about neuroscience and why do we repeat the use, and why do we use enough to actually get into trouble. Going to have a story about a person who had a problem with alcohol, talk about ways to treat and recover from alcohol use problems, and talk about the neuroscience of opioid use and dependence and how people get over that and or don't get over that. So, neuroscience and epidemiology. Risk factors for starting drinking are pretty obvious. They're mostly environmental, right? There are whole countries where there's very little drinking going on. Wisconsin is not
It's
one
not
of the
that place.
places where there's not much drinking going on. It is a place where drinking is normative. Okay, if you grow up in Wisconsin and don't drink, you're very odd. It's not that that might not be a really good decision. It's just that statistically you're odd. So you're very, very likely to get exposed to that 2-carbon molecule, and your brain's going to get exposed to it. And that leads to a series of consequences for you. So Wisconsin, there's some interesting things about the environment. The biggest predictor of whether or not you drink is how many spots sell alcohol within a mile or two of your house. So if you just decrease the total number of liquor licenses in the state of Wisconsin, you would probably lower the drinking rate, especially among the adolescents. So just make it less available, you drink less, there are less problems. That's been replicated a gazillion times, but who's one of the biggest political contributors in Wisconsin? The Wisconsin Tavern League. Puts a lot of people in and out of office. You do not want the tavern owners in small town Wisconsin against you if you expect to get back to the state legislature. And you sure don't want to do it if you're a city council member. So the culture is there's a lot of alcohol around here. Family environment, guess what? It's exactly what you think. If people are intact and they have regular schedules and mom and dad know where the kids are all the time and they have like 4 to 5 family dinners a week, they go to church, everybody graduates from high school, guess what? The drinking rate is lower. School environment, kind of the same thing. If your school is the kind of place where alcohol and marijuana are kind of accepted, no problem with that, and there aren't many strict, nobody gets kicked off the athletic teams for drug and alcohol use, there's going to be more drug and alcohol use. It's pretty much that simple. And then, of course, the other risk factors for starting is you usually start when you're an adolescent. We're going to talk about the problem of the adolescent brain as we go along, because it's just perfect for getting drugs and alcohol started. So the real question, so that's sort of why you might have your first drink. The real question is, why do you do it again? Most people don't like their first taste of alcohol, right? Most people don't like their first cigarette. A lot of people throw up after their first cigarette, or especially if you get them to do their first cigar, big trouble. Okay? So why do people repeat? Everybody says, well, it's so good. Not really. So, but if you do something and then you think, I got to do that again, you might not even have that thought consciously. You just find yourself doing it again. That's something that's reinforcing. And reinforcing, that's called a positive reinforcer. You use things, you do things again, you do behaviors again that increase dopamine in your nucleus accumbens part of your brain, your reward pathway, when you do them. And you are even more likely to do them if that happens rapidly. So cigarettes, when you suck the nicotine in along with the smoke in a cigarette, it gets to your brain in 7 seconds and releases dopamine. And so, gee, I better take another suck off that cigarette. Same thing with the crack pipe. Okay? Boom, it's there. And cocaine's even a better releaser of dopamine. So the more that behavior is reinforced, you will find yourself doing it without even thinking about it. And it's all done at a sub-thinking level. It's automatic. So with alcohol, you not only get now it doesn't go as fast because it goes in your mouth, you could shoot it up IV and it would go faster. But if you drink alcohol, like most people do, it goes to your stomach before it gets absorbed and gets up to your brain. So that actually is a little slower. It takes 30 seconds probably or more for alcohol to have any effect in your brain. And it takes actually, it works much, much faster if you do a couple shots. So why do people do a couple shots before they go out to the bars? They want to both get the buzz rapidly with the actual rapid dopamine, and then they want to get their blood alcohol level up to a place where they can drink slow at bars where they're way overcharging you for liquor, so you can maintain your buzz. But high proof liquor taken quick will raise that dopamine level faster. So the other thing is that alcohol is kind of a dirty drug. It not only raises dopamine, but it also, in your brain, you have a release of your endorphins when you drink alcohol. So there's that kind of rush kind of feeling that people get. And we'll talk about, you'll get a lot more of a rush from alcohol at your age than I do at my age, because you're closer to an adolescent brain. Listen, my brain stopped getting the excitatory aspect of alcohol a long time ago, but if you see college students on a football weekend, clearly people get excited by alcohol when they're between 15 and 28.
And then when you get old like me, you just get sleepy.
That's right.
It's actually true.
And it
Different effects.
happens in rats and monkeys too, so it's a cross-species issue. Also, before puberty, it's a sedative. But at puberty and into young adulthood, it's a stimulant. So you get a stimulant part of it with alcohol, but you also get endogenous opioids. So you get that kind of warm, happy feeling that opiates give you. And mixtures like alcohol, alcohol is really a great drug because you get dopamine, you get the opiates, that warm, happy feeling, and then you get an increase in gamma-aminobutyric acid, GABA, which is sort of a calming thing for your whole brain. So you have a mixture of go fast, feel good. Perfect. It all comes in one drug, and it's legal. Could be better. So, now, the other thing that happens, now there's some people who actually have a punishing effect of alcohol. There's a variety of different punishing effects. The most famous one are people who have mostly Asian people who have slower metabolism of acetaldehyde. They have a form of acetaldehyde dehydrogenase that doesn't work as fast. And acetaldehyde causes a terrible flushing. Your skin gets really red. But the really difficult part of it is you feel like you're going to have a heart attack. And that tends to stop people from drinking. But there are people who flush, but they love it so much that they'll drink through the flush. And if you're willing, if you meet one of those folks in treatment and they drink through the flush, they are hard to get to quit because they really, really, really like alcohol to drink through a flush. Now, once you have this positive reinforcer, it also generalizes to the situation you're in, right? Your brain says, you felt really good when you drank, and you start getting conditioned place preferences. All of a sudden, now I think they remodeled the club for maybe the second or third time in its 100-year history. But all of a sudden, you don't mind going to Wando's, which smells like beer even in the middle of the day, right? You get a conditioned place preference. You get conditioned people preferences. I drank with so-and-so and we all felt good. And wasn't that great? So it all works together. So pretty soon you meet so-and-so who you go drinking with and you say, I could use a beer. That'd be good. How did that happen? It happened because you saw the people, person, or thing you had that dopamine release with. And it happens without you even thinking about it. So, now, most people drink quite a bit. What's the year in which for college kids, what's the year their drinking goes up the most? In their whole lifetime? Freshman year of college, right? If you don't go to college, the biggest increase happens when you're in high school. And you've already leveled off by the time you've gotten to college, okay? So the college kids all wait to get that acceptance letter and then start drinking, okay? And there's lots and lots of problems with college age drinking. There's a handout over there for people who want to take one later on. But and so there's many more, deaths. There's many more people who end up going to school for 5 or 6 years when they could have gotten through in 4 years. There's many more unwanted sexual encounters. There's many more blackouts. There's many more all kinds of things right in the time frame of college. But most people go on and after college decrease their drinking dramatically. They've just increased their odds of being a alcohol-dependent person the rest of their life. Okay? So if the kinds of folks who came to college they probably had a lower likelihood of becoming an alcohol-dependent person than the general population, because you have lots of things that protect you. You're smarter, you have more money, you have lots of environmental things that are better for you than for other people. But so if there would have been 5% of people who were going to end up being alcoholic, maybe if you come to college and you drink heavily, you've increased your odds to 8 or 9%. You've doubled them, almost, something like that. Maybe even a little higher. But 85–90% of people, they go on and they desist. Instead of persist, they desist. Medical school helped me desist. I was part badger, part burnout. But 7:45 anatomy class kind of killed drinking. And the fact that you could never not study. every single day, kind of eliminated that. And one of the other things I had to do was stop living with people who were in their second senior year. I realized you guys can party at a much higher rate of speed than I have time for now. So I really missed that, actually, but it went away. It desisted. I had other reinforcers in my life that were important, and that's very, very useful. But Mark Schuckett and colleagues actually did a study that really tells you who's at huge risk. First of all, I realized much later in my life, I looked back at my college years and thought, gosh, I had a father who was alcoholic. Okay, he went to work every day, but besides work, his second favorite occupation was being drunk. And so, it wasn't a terrible, awful life. It was actually nice and predictable, because you could probably plot his blood alcohol level. At 5:30 it's this, at 6:30 it's that, at 7:30 it's that, at 8 he passes out on the floor. We do it again the next time. It was very, there was nothing, nobody got hit, nobody got hurt. It was kind of boring. But what I didn't really realize is by going off and drinking, I had about a 50% chance of being an alcoholic. If you're a son of a male alcoholic, you have about a 50% shot of being an alcoholic. Now somebody said, you are now about to flip a coin here. You're going to turn out you're like your dad or not. I probably would have gone not. Seriously, it wasn't that much fun. So we know that. That stops almost nobody. Here's a study that might help you understand and talk to others about it. So we know that 50% of all sons of male alcoholics are going to be alcoholic. We have no idea how that happens, except for this study. Schuckett grabbed a whole bunch of alcoholic patients who had 18-year-old sons and found a bunch of age-matched, these were all men, sort of socioeconomically matched people who had 18-year-old sons who, where the father was non-alcoholic. All the 18-year-old sons, this was when 18 was the drinking age, had to report that they had had something to drink in their life, but they'd never been drunk. Now, you can argue about how accurate that reporting might have been, but they took them to a lab then and got them drunk for the very first time to about 0.1 or 100 milligram percent. So a little bit higher than drunken driving, which is 0.08. So they took them there, and what the sons of alcoholics did when they got to that level is they could do all the roadside drunk tests better than the sons of non-alcoholics, despite the fact they hadn't had their own personal experience with alcohol. They could walk the tightrope better. They could stand on 1 foot longer and count backwards from 100. They could do finger to nose, all which ways. All of that was better. They liked the experience better on their very first drunkenness. Their EEG their brain waves slowed down less on their very first drunkenness than the sons of the non-alcoholics. And their cortisol, their stress hormone, went up less on their very first drunkenness. Okay? So they had far fewer bad effects and a much more positive effect the very first time they got drunk than the sons of the non-alcoholics. But here's the cool part of this study. 10 years later, Schuckett looks up all of the 18-year-olds who are now 28-year-olds. And as you might guess, there are a lot more sons of alcoholics who had become alcohol dependent by 28 than sons of non-alcoholics. But the best predictor of who became alcoholic were people who had less body sway, less change in EEG measure, less increase in cortisol, and more enjoyment. Because some people who are the sons of non-alcoholics become alcoholic anyway, and they were much more likely to have that profile on the first drunkenness. So, for college age drinkers, what does that tell us? The kind of people who can drink other people under the table, who don't have hangovers, who look for all the world like they've had hardly anything to drink, they're in big trouble. Because they end up exposing their brain to higher levels of alcohol with less warning that they're, hey, you're taking a poison. Because alcohol is really strangely perceived by your brain. It's part perceived like a sweet reinforcer, and it's part perceived like a bitter poison. These guys don't know at all that they've got a bitter poison in their mouth. Those of you who are probably not going to be alcoholics, you find it hard to imagine how somebody could decide to gradually become a Scotch connoisseur because it all tastes like fire. Let me perceive that better. Those people are actually all in trouble who can expose their brain to that. So being a low reactor encourages one to expose one's brain to alcohol more often and to higher levels of blood alcohol level. And now what happens is as you use alcohol more and more, your body adjusts to the effects of alcohol. So alcohol, like I said, gives out more dopamine, gives out more endorphins, and gives out more GABA. Well, pretty soon, your body has to adjust to that and say, well, we can't let ourselves get all out of whack every time we drink alcohol. And so your body actually raises a stress hormone called CRH, which decreases the amount of dopamine that comes out. It raises a excitatory neurotransmitter called glutamate and lowers GABA to keep from getting too sedated. And then when you pull alcohol away, you're in this high stress hormone, low dopamine. Everything is you're kind of grouchy, and the world is kind of blah. And you say to yourself, and you don't put those together, and you say, you don't say this actually, your brain does this. We got to stop for a beer. That's what we got to do. That'd be good. Or, if you go fishing or play softball, you got to have some beer there, okay? And pretty soon you find out, especially coming from Sheboygan, Wisconsin, you find out there's virtually no activities that should be done without beer. Pretty soon you got a keg on second base. I've been in those games. So, what else do we know that's important? Alcohol may be the perfect drug for adolescent creatures. What does the adolescent primate have to do? The adolescent primate has to strike out on their own and set up a family somewhere away in some way from the main herd. And they have to become risk takers and become more social. And like I said, prepubescent people and older people, older primates, older rats, alcohol is a sedative. But in the post-pubescent early adulthood stage, it increases sexual activity, it increases social activity, it's a stimulant. It kind of does, what the old poet said, candy is dandy, but liquor is quicker. Okay? It does that. It's what people want. Okay? The problem is it's very, very risky. You have all kinds of other risky decisions made under the effects of drugs and alcohol. The other problem is it actually changes your brain maybe permanently, because there's a lot of changing in the pruning of your brain that happen, pruning of connections between one neuron and another goes on extensively still in adolescence. If it goes on in the presence of alcohol and other drugs, it's different. Your brain.
We should put out there, adolescence isn't like 16 to 18.
Yeah.
When we say adolescents, we mean like up to 25.
Yeah.
So they should-
Actually, easily, and males probably longer.
Exactly.
Uh,
Males
20
have a prolonged adolescence,
20
neurologically.
Yeah. 24-year-old males are just finishing myelinating their frontal lobes. And just to make you know how pervasive this problem is with, well, there's a lot of advantages to that. Like if you're in the military and you decide who can we talk into flying this plane that gets shot down a lot? It's the people under 24. If you're running a prison in Wisconsin, actually the people who run prisons have special sections or special advice given out to guards to watch out for the people under 24, because they do crazier things even by the standards of prison populations. Okay? Because they're not ready yet. So, the last thing we need to know before we talk about a story is, okay, we've talked about what draws people to alcohol, but really the problem is people do say, gosh, this has made, my life is out of control. I'm not going to class. Or maybe later on they're saying, you know, classic male doctor story is they show up at the office or in the operating room drunk one day, and they're threatened with not being a doctor anymore. And then somebody says, well, what happened to your wife? Well, I guess she left. It's a classic myth. Where are your kids? I don't know. But now I'm not going to be a doctor? Oh no, I guess I've made a lot of bad decisions. I've got to stop. But people relapse. Why do they relapse when there's so many things that are so obvious that have gone wrong in their life? And it turns out that if you've used alcohol long enough to have the neurochemical adjustments we've talked about, you're left with a irritable, overexcited brain with too little GABA, too much glutamate, and you're in a chronically irritable anhedonic state. So the anhedonic means you don't feel pleasure. The classic situation, it's even worse for cocaine addicts, is your brain has gotten so good at fighting back against that chronic dopamine overstimulation, that chronic stimulation of your reward system, that when you pull out the chronic stimulator, the cocaine or the alcohol, you're left with a brain that is constantly fighting pleasure, constantly fighting reinforcement. This probably lasts for about the first year of being sober, at least. So people go, I can't believe I gave up alcohol, cocaine, or heroin for a life as blah and boring as this. I've had spouses of people who've gotten into recovery saying, man, I can't take him like this. I hope he goes back to using. I said, are you kidding, Wade? Are you kidding, man? You can't possibly do that. Yeah, it's that gray a world when your brain has been turned on to constantly fighting pleasure. So, all of that for background, this is how it sounds when you talk about a real person.
Yeah. So, as we discussed briefly earlier, I work in a number of different places around town. So I can see a lot of people with various and sundry drug and alcohol problems. This is a patient who, so this is not her real name, so identifying information has been changed, so you guys may know this person, but hopefully you will not recognize her. This is a woman I actually saw starting at my job at Tiberian. So this is a woman named Cheryl. She is a 21-year-old junior, right? She's pretty successful. She's a double major. She has a 3.8 GPA. Like, her life in general is pretty put together, I mean, I would say. She does drink Thursday, Friday, Saturday with her friends. This is not uncommon, right? She has a couple shots usually, or a couple beers before she goes out. Sometimes they go to a bar, sometimes they go to a party. But like Dean talked about, it's, again, not unusual. It's fairly classic, right, to drink a little bit before you go. It kind of greases the wheels. She has had a couple blackouts. She works, I say part-time as a waitress, I'll say very part-time, but at a fairly high-end restaurant here in town. But has anyone ever worked as a waiter or waitress? Oh my God, like one dude? All right. Well, you may be familiar with the phenomenon where when the restaurant closes, right, all the cooks and people kind of sit around, they have a drink, right? So sometimes she's working like a Tuesday or something, and she'll have a drink or two after work. Other stuff, she lives in an apartment. She's had a series of breakups over the past couple of years, and she just can't seem to sort of maintain a relationship. This is pretty upsetting to her. She does use Adderall maybe once or twice a week. She's like, look, I'm a double major, I'm really busy, I work, like, I gotta get stuff done. So she uses Adderall basically to help her stay. This is not uncommon, I would say. Does anyone know someone who sort of drinks like this or uses like this or looks like this? Yes. This dude knows someone. In the back, you know someone. Yeah, right? I mean, this is not like a highly unusual pattern of use for someone who is in college, right? Maybe some of you are like, whoa, but I think most people are like, yeah, that's pretty normal. The issue here was that her friends were actually concerned more about her sort of interpersonal issues, right, than necessarily her like academic standing. I mean, I haven't verified her GPA, but from everything she tells me, she was doing fine academically, but like I said, really struggling interpersonally. So they sort of came to her, did a little intervention, right, and talked about Cheryl really like shouldn't like drink and black out at parties and hook up with random dudes. Like it's starting to look really bad. Like you got to get that under control. But I will say the intervention wasn't particularly successful. But I do want to talk for a minute about how one would talk to someone about their drug and alcohol use. Have any of you guys ever sat down with someone and said, like, I'm concerned about your drinking? No one has ever has. Has anyone ever known someone whose drinking you were concerned about? Or other things? I see some of those. Okay. So that's why I think it's worth talking about that for a minute. And I'm actually going to have you guys do this with each other just for like 1 minute, right? Because it gets easier with practice. The first time you do it, you feel like, I can't believe I'm going to sit down and tell someone that they're drinking too much. But if you practiced it, it actually makes it much easier.
The down arrow.
Down arrow does not want to go. Try now. There we go. Okay. So here are a few key tactics, right? Don't talk to someone when they're drunk. Like, this should be very obvious, I hope. But lots of people, right, their roommate comes home drunk and it's like, she just barfed in my boots and I'm really pissed off and like, I'm going to tell her right now, like, your drinking is out of control, you cannot barf in my boots again. This does not go well, okay? So just put the boots aside, maybe leave them in her room, and deal with it in the morning, okay? Try and find a low stress time. A classic time to do this would be like a Saturday morning, okay? Assuming the person is not hungover. You do have to weigh that. But you want to probably find a time, like I said, in the morning. You've got the whole weekend. They're not too drunk. They're not too hungover. Now is a nice time to sit down with someone. Other things, try to use I and we statements, right? Gosh, it seems like we're really drinking a lot. Or things like, I'm really worried about you. I find this kind of hard to deal with, right? It's not a you thing. You in the blue shirt, your drinking is out of control, right? The man in the blue shirt probably does not want my finger pointing at him anymore. Whereas if I make it more about, we're concerned, I'm worried, right? That goes a lot better. The key thing is you want to be supportive of the person, right? Like, I'm really worried about you. I want to see if there's anything I can do. Not, like I said, not accusatory. A couple other things, present some data. Gosh, I'm really concerned that things are not going that well with the way we're drinking. For example, you came home last night and you puked in my boots, right? Or, for example, you passed out at that party last week and someone had to like carry you out to the stoop. So you want to present some data, or it seems like you're missing class, or something like that. Some form of data so that you can sort of back up what you're saying. And then, if you get to the point where they're like, yeah, maybe you're right, offering some resources is good, let's try this. And then just being open to whatever they have to say, right? There are obviously a lot of good things about drinking. Like, most people at this campus drink, and it's reinforcing, it's socially acceptable, it's fun, it's what everyone does. Like, people do have reasons why they want to continue drinking, and it pays to listen to those, right? So if you can sort of engage them in a conversation and be like, I'm kind of concerned about how much we're drinking. I noticed that for the past 3 days you've been blacking out. What do you think is going on? Do you want to keep drinking this much? Why are we doing this, right? And so, like I said, hopefully you can generate a conversation where they can identify some pros and cons, and then you can talk a little bit more about that. The goal of this intervention is not necessarily to get them into treatment, right? But just to start an open dialogue where they can tell you what they're feeling, what they're thinking. So I want people to try this just for 1 second. I want you to pair up. You, sir, I don't know who you're going to pair with, but you can probably find someone. And just pretend, you can use the pooped in the boots example or whatever, right? Pretend that you're going to talk to your friend for 1 second about their drinking. Just give it a try, because it does get easier with practice. Go now. All right, so, it's a little awkward, right? It's a little bit weird, but I didn't see anyone cry or get too upset about it. So you can do this. Dean and I were just chatting. This is the exact same way as a physician, right, that you approach this with your patients, just so you guys know. As you go through med school and end up seeing patients, you'll see tons of people who you're like, I'm a little concerned about your drinking. I've noticed you're missing work. What's going on with that? Tell me more, right? And that's exactly the same way that you would approach it with one of your friends. Most people, right, are not going to be like, you're so right. From here on out, I quit and I'm going to be sober forever, right? That's probably not the outcome. But people might be interested, right? Maybe they're like, maybe I'll cut down, maybe I'll think about it. At least you're planting the seed. In terms of, I did mention, right, offer resources. So if they do get to the point where they're like, maybe you're right. It's probably not cool to black out quite so much. Maybe we should cut down. You're right, we should cut down a little bit. Then you want to be able to have some options, right? Some ideas of like, oh, how would we do that? So I do have a list of resources here, starting with things that you will probably not use. I'm going from least likely to most likely, okay? Probably when you're sitting there talking to your friend and they're like, I guess I could cut down a little. Finals are coming up. I should study a little more. Right? You're probably not going to be like, and our next step should be to go to AA. Most people are probably not going to go for that. You're going to lose them at that point, especially because AA is perceived as really, right, for like hardcore alcoholics. And most people are like, that's not me. I'm not going there. That being said, it is a useful program. There are groups that are just for, for people sort of 19 and older, or even younger adolescent groups of AA. So it's not uncommon for someone in this age bracket to be in AA, but it's not for everyone, and it's probably not your first step. Al-Anon, also helpful. If you have someone you're really worried about and you don't really know what to do, it is not a bad idea to go to an Al-Anon meeting, because these are people who have friends, partners, whatever, who are drinking heavily, and they're there to like help support them, intervene with them, do what they can. They have tons of resources. They're great. Like I said. But probably you're not going to spend your Saturday morning hanging out at an Al-Anon meeting. Probably not. Other options in the community, right? Tellurian, Connections Counseling, Gateway, New Start. Some people don't want to go to UHS. Some people are like, I work there, I know someone who works there, or whatever. It's not like, I'm just not going to go there. If they're to the point where they feel like, yeah, maybe it's time for me to like see someone and talk about this, there's a million other options, right? I didn't mention Tellurian has free assessments at 8 a.m. You can also call for individual appointments. I would call for an individual appointment, right, before going to a walk-in. If you go to a walk-in, like, alcohol assessment center, you're probably going to turn right around and walk the hell out. because there are going to be a lot of people there who do not look like you, right? A lot of people who are like, I've been drinking heavy for 45 years, and like, I have a six-pack with me kind of thing. It's probably not where you want to take your friend the very first time. But like I said, any of these places do individual counseling. Connections and Florian also do the basics program. Are you guys familiar with that? Anyone? No one's familiar with the basics. This girl knows. Tell me.
I just know I've heard of it, I don't know.
Is that the class that you take after you get like a ticket here?
Yes, ding. She has it in one. Yes, so if you get a ticket or you get, right, like busted at a house party or something like that, you have to go through the basics class. So both of these programs, Tellurian and Connections, have tons of UW folks going through this, right? They do individual and they do group classes, and it's like 4 or 6 classes. UHS, right, this is obvious, hopefully. Like, you can just walk in anytime between 9 and 4, Monday through Friday. You can talk to someone immediately. You can go with your friend. You can both talk to someone. Totally fine. The most likely thing, I think, is actually using this website, Rethinking Drinking. Because again, right, you're at the union, you're at the coffee shop, you just talk to your friend about it. You're not all that likely to be like, let's truck down to UHS right now. Right? It's more likely you're like, yeah, we should really cut down. Okay, let's do that. And right, maybe you're going to leave it there. It's nice to have something. Who has a smartphone on them? Does anyone have their iPhone with them? Pull it out right now and Google Rethinking Drinking, because this is an awesome website that you can pull up. And I will try to, if I can, pull it up here as well. It is super helpful. See who's faster. Does anyone have it? Ding, ding. Anyone else? These people do? Nice. All right, it's that fast, right? All right. So you look at this and you're sort of like, what the hell is all this? But it's actually very intuitive and easy to use. So you kind of click through. Okay, what's your drinking pattern, right? On any day in the past year, have you ever had more than 3 standard drinks? Oh. Well, I guess I have. In your typical week, how many days per week do you drink alcohol? Well, I'll say 3. On your typical drinking day, how many drinks do you have? Oh, too many to count. I don't know. Maybe 4? Well, if it's a weekend, right, like maybe 6. Okay. Like I said, that's not like all that unusual. Oh, let's see what it says. I actually don't know what it's going to say. Oh, I'm in the top 9% of the country. Woo! Right? And you're like, oh, really? Seriously? Like, that's not that much. But this provides some interesting feedback, right? So I think it's kind of helpful to just be like, oh, you know what? I know about this website. Let's take a look and see where we're at. When you're like, am I seriously in the top 9% of drinkers in the country? You do sort of stop and say to yourself, wow, do I feel a little bad about that? Or am I okay with that? The other thing is that's I like about this website, right? Let's see, go over here. Alright, so like again, most people are not going to be like, I'm all done and I'm going to AA. Most people are going to say, maybe I should cut down a little bit. And then rather than just leave it at that, this is a nice thing to be like, how, right? We need a next step, like how are we going to cut down? I'm using the royal we because it's always nice if your friend's cutting down to cut down so they don't feel so alone. Right, so keep track of how much you drink. I like the pace and space, right? Have one alcoholic drink and then space it with something that's non-alcoholic. Eat something when you go out. Right? There's just lots of nice ideas where you don't have to quit drinking, right? But maybe we can just cut down a little bit, make it through finals and feel good about ourselves. So that's that webpage. What? Like I said, I can't say enough good things about it. It's super helpful. It also provides you with resources in your area in case you don't remember how to get to UHS. All right. So the intervention goes nowhere, basically, right? Her friends are like, we're worried about you. And she basically is like, buzz off. And that was the end of that. And so then they felt all bad and they didn't talk about it again. So last year, about this time, she drinks most of 1 liter of SoCo, which, let me say, It's just not classy, frankly. But regardless, that's what happens. I mean, not uncommon, but still, a leader so oh my God. And then, right, when she wakes up, she's like, where the hell am I? So does anyone know where this is? It looks like prison, but it's not. I mean, she did not get taken to prison for drinking a liter of SoCo. So this is detox. Is anyone? Oh, look, the girl in the back's all excited about detox.
Yeah.
Woo! Has anyone actually been to detox? Like, not necessarily as a patient, but maybe just to take a look? Hmm?
My friend has.
Your friend has, yeah. So detox is run by Tellurian, which is one of the agents. It's county funded, but it's managed by Tellurian, which is one of the agencies I work at. Hopefully I'll never see any of your shining faces come through our doors, but it's not impossible, right? It's a 30-bed unit. These pictures make it look much nicer than it actually is, just so you know. It's about 30 beds, right? The police typically bring people in, or they come to the ER. Cheryl got picked up. Her just like wandering around outside. I think she blew like a .23 or something. So some people are like, that's nothing, right? Come on, it's not like she blew a .35, right? But regardless, she got taken to detox. So they have about 5,000 people come through a year, and of those, somewhere in the 600 to 700 range are UW students. So like I said, it's not super common, but it's not all that uncommon either. People go through detox. As I said, it's 30 beds, and those are what the beds look like. You get a room, dudes share 2 to a room, women are in their own room. For women, there's a laser lock on the door so that no one can come in or out of their room without setting off the alarm. Just because if you have 30 drunk dudes and a chick, right, like it's not particularly safe. It's not a pretty place, but it does its job. They do seclusion and restraint sometimes. So you can see on the bottom of the bed, I don't know how well you guys can see this, but there are these round rings here. They do use those for leather restraints for patients who are agitated or aggressive. So they literally like tie people to their beds. And this is part of the intake room. It's very attractive, as you can see. It's sort of like a minimum security prison. It's a locked unit, right? You can't come or go of your own free will. So that's detox. Like I said, it's not pleasant, but definitely a fair number of people go through it every year. Do you have questions about detox? Because people are often like, oh, I didn't realize that could happen.
How long do they stay there?
It's an excellent question. So, average length of stay is 72 hours. Okay, that's like 72 hours in that little room is not that awesome of a time. But people basically stay until they're sober and have been assessed if they're safe to go home. Everyone, before they leave, meets with a drug or alcohol counselor in order to sort of say like, whoa, you ended up with detox, it's not cool, what's your next steps? So, but like I said, 72 hours is the average length of stay.
Do they like continually check up on the person, or?
Yeah, they don't just like throw them in there and let them. There is, the
like,
other classy thing is there's like, in every room, there's a drain in the middle of the floor. So, like, there's this little squeegee to
And then like after they leave, like do they make sure they?
make sure they follow up? Nope, there's no follow-up. So occasionally, right, people from detox do get referred out to other programs. So in this particular case, this person got referred to New Start where I work. And so then there is some follow-up because the New Start program will be like, okay, you have this appointment, you didn't show up, and then I give you a call. Most people sober up and go home and don't have any follow-up at all. So, yeah.
Like, do they put like IVs into the people, or like are there specific things they do?
No, that's a great question, right? So, detox is like minimal medical management. It is not a hospital. Like I said, this is like what you see is what you get, right? There's always a nurse on staff to make sure that no one has a seizure and dies. But in general, they do give them medications to help with withdrawal. So they sort of ease the transition, but that's about it, right? It is really like, we're going to give you some meds, we're going to get you sober, and we're going to send you on your way. Yeah.
Do they treat people differently based on their age, like say fifth year senior versus a freshman?
Not a bit. Nope. There's no, like, if, again, women generally have their own room. Sometimes they share, but not the guy. Men almost always are 2 to a room. You could be in there with you know, a 45-year-old dude who just got out of prison kind of thing. Like, there's no, they take all comers, they just put them in. It's not uncommon for detox to be full, right? On any given night, 30 beds is not enough for the Madison area. So then they often send people other places, hospitals, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Is it also like, I heard it's really expensive too.
It is also very expensive. You will get a bill for $495 for every 24 hours that you have spent in their lovely facility, right? That is uncool. But after you've been through detox and you go home and you're like, are you seriously sending me a bill for $1,000 for an extremely unpleasant experience? Oh yes, they are, right? The county will bill you. If you have private insurance, insurance will often cover this, but typically you still get a bill in the mail, and then you have to go to your insurance and say, I went through detox, can you pay this? So.
And then your insurance rates will go up because you are a hell of a bad risk.
Exactly, right? So that's, some people just want to pay it out of pocket. Other questions? Like I said, it happens, right? You know someone who went through detox, like I said, 500 to 700 people a year from the U go through detox, and a lot more end up in the hospital. So it's not uncommon, and I think it's just worth people knowing, like.
And probably like one person every couple of years dies of alcohol poisoning at the UW. Where usually younger drinkers just drink with older drinkers at a rapid rate. It's often a young woman.
Yep.
100-pound woman drinking with a 200-pound man has to drink half as much. If they've been drinking, you know, if you keep up drink for drink, you end up dead, they go home. It's really pretty awful.
So again, this is, like I said, not uncommon. I mean, and for Cheryl, this was just bad luck, right? It was bum luck that she was like wandering home. The police saw her in the middle of a cold day and were like, what's that chick with no shoes doing on the street, right? And like scooped her up and took her to detox, you know? Plenty of people drink like she does and do just fine, but she had a bad experience and she wound up here. And like I said, that's actually when I picked her up. So after that, she did get referred out to one of the, she didn't want to go to UHS. And UHS actually sends most people who they think need treatment, they actually send out to other places. That's not uncommon at all. They don't have a lot of in-house treatment. So they sent her out to New Start where I work, and she went through a intensive outpatient program. So we can talk a little bit about what that is or what that looks like, right? Because, you know, once you go through detox, you're like, oh, then what happens? So there's a whole pile of stuff, basically, that we can do for people with alcohol problems, and this is just sort of a summary of some of these. Right, you can do the 12-step programs, there's individual motivational interviewing, there's medications, which we can talk a little bit more about, there's mindfulness-based relapse. Sort of the classic is kind of a conglomeration of these, like I said, in what we call an intensive outpatient program. Do you want to say any more about this, or we can just?
No.
Okay. So, an IOP program is 4 days a week, 4 to 5 days a week, 4 hours a day, right? It's called intensive for a reason. You can generally do a morning session, like 8 to noon, or you can do an evening session starting at 5 or 6. So it has a big impact on the rest of your life if you're going to be doing this every day for 4 weeks. So she did go through that. She came out of it saying, all right, you know, I was drinking a little too heavy, yes, but I'm not really sure I want to quit even after all this. Everyone drinks this much, it's not really that big a deal. She did do some weekly one-on-one therapy sessions, and she was like, I'm going to be sober for a while. She was actually particularly motivated because she had a trip to Peru coming up for an archaeological dig, and she actually didn't get to go because of this whole alcohol incident. And so she was like, all right, you know what, I'm going to toe the line for a while, I'm going to quit drinking, I'll do the IOP, I'll do the one-on-one sessions, I'm just going to be sober, and we'll just be done with this. But then, so in September of this year, she's going to go to a football game, and she was like, oh my God, right, like this has been forever, I haven't had anything to drink. I just am going to have a couple drinks, like I'm sick of this. Had a couple beers, went fine, went to the game, came home. Next week she was like, that went great. I'm going to have a couple beers again, right? Like, I'm back on it. And her roommates who had previously been like, I'm really worried about you drinking, were like, yay, Cheryl's back, we're so excited. They were pretty jazzed to have her, right, come out back to the bars, that kind of thing. So, but it didn't take very long, right, before she was hanging out with the same people and drinking the same amount. Like, of course, this is exactly what we would expect. And then in February of this year, so she stopped going to treatment and started drinking again. In February of this year, she ended up coming back. I will say an embarrassing incident at a party, without going into a lot of details, but suffice it to say, an embarrassing sexual incident at a party. And she was just like, wow, that was not what I wanted to have happen. Maybe it's time to stop drinking again. So she's now been sober for 2 months. She's back on track to go to Peru this summer. She's pretty excited about that. And right, probably she will do absolutely fine. Like I said, like Dean was saying, most people who drink at this rate do absolutely fine, right? They get done with college, they go on, they have a normal life, and they cut down on their drinking, and it's not a big deal. So I predict not a problem. You know, the issue really was, the issue was that the drinking was leading to some interpersonal issues, as well as some academic issues in terms of her being able to fill out this data inquiry. So that's kind of one story.
Yeah, she's, I think one of the critical things about the end of this story is she came back to treatment.
Right.
Now, there's this business of blaming people for their illness. Oh, you don't want to get better. I think virtually everybody wants to have a better life than the one they currently have. Sometimes they don't want to go through all the steps it takes to, you know, like I want to run a marathon, I just don't want to work out enough to run one. You know, I want to be sober, I just don't want to do all the things I need to do to be sober.
Yeah.
It's hard to make changes, but most people make the most critical changes in their life without professional help, actually. Most people have still quit smoking without any of the help smoking stuff. Most people have still quit drinking without any help, okay? They somehow make a decision that it's time. Now, if you combine that decision that it's time to do something with help, you do better. But that decision is really, really a critical part of things.
Right.
And so that's, to me, the coolest part of that story. Although I would say Cheryl is a little past where people just go to normal.
Yeah,
but she's still more likely to become a normal or non-drinker than she is to be a 40-year alcoholic.
Right.
So if you look at the statistics, the highest percentage of people who are ever going to be alcohol dependent, according to our criteria, are between 18 and 25. And most of those people quit on their own, or with relatively little help. So that's good news.
So we're going to move on to the second part of the talk. I think we should take like a 2-minute break, if people are cool with that. But I do want to do just a quick question. So almost everyone in the room nodded their head when I was like, does anyone know someone who drinks like Cheryl? People are like, yeah, that's me. Like, everyone drinks like Cheryl, right? Like, that's totally normal. A quick survey. How many people know someone who uses Adderall, stimulants, that kind of thing to help them study? I know like many people, right? Okay. And I will add non-prescribed. So that is also very important. How many people know someone who has dabbled in opioids? Like, been in a party, crushed and stirred a few OPs, not a big deal. So fewer people, right? But I would say there's maybe a third or a quarter of us in here. So that's actually what we're going to talk about in the second half, is opioid use, which is a little bit of a different animal than alcohol use. So, questions at this point? All right. I say 2-minute break, 2-3 minutes, and we'll be right back.
2,000 somewhere in there. That would be zero.
When I'll reveal what an old woman I am, but I graduated from college in '99. Dude, I didn't know anyone who did opioids. Like, seriously, 0%. Like, maybe once there was like, oh, that guy shot heroin. That guy, you know that guy? Yeah. Right? But like, yeah, like mushrooms, LSD, like all that other stuff, yes. Opioids? What? That was hardcore back in the day.
And now, opioids opiates are the leading cause of injury, death in Dane County, exceeding traffic accidents. More people die of opiate overdose, and most of those people are young. So it's an incredible change. Most of those people start actually on diverted prescription pills, which are now widely available, and people are, the 80s and 90s were kind of devoted to get doctors to hand out more opiates for people in severe pain. Now the 2010s are about how to get doctors to give tenure prescriptions so less and less of those drugs are diverted. I'm so old, I remember being in a drugstore where there was a holdup and they were robbing the cash register. Now people go up to the back and rob the oxys. Nobody robs the cash register, okay? Because oxys are a lot better way to make money than actual money. So things have changed incredibly. There's a huge problem. The other problem that allows you to go from prescription diversion to heroin much easier than ever before is heroin is often cheaper than prescription diversion. So you get started snorting some diverted opiate or just orally taking some diverted opiate, but you move on for economic reasons to snorting heroin. Now you never used to be able to snort or smoke heroin. You could smoke opium, but there wasn't pure enough drug in the United States until the global war on terrorism.
Brought us some good stuff.
Yeah, it's one of the chief wonderful results of that venture. It did it in a couple ways. One is, first of all, the Colombians started taking over opiates, and that got us a much more direct and cheaper path to more opiates in the country. And two, people developed better purification, and it was really needed to pay off the Taliban. So, unbelievable story of death in America related to a whole variety of changes in availability of drug. And so that's a big deal, is availability. So we talk a lot about whether a drug is addictive. Opiates clearly are addictive. One of the things that determines whether it's addictive is, does it release dopamine in the nucleus accumbens when you take it? If it doesn't, we haven't found any drug that people will take over and over and over again. So actually the psychedelics, LSD, things like that, don't really usually release any dopamine, and they're really not addictive. Some people use them more often than others, but they don't get into the addictive range. So all of them release dopamine in the nucleus accumbens. Natural reinforcers have a similar effect. It's just that where chocolate gives you a little dopamine in your nucleus accumbens, cocaine gives you about 50 times that much. So it works better, works faster, and it co-opts natural reinforcement mechanisms. If we didn't have a natural reinforcement mechanism, cocaine wouldn't have anywhere to act. So now the problem is with opiates is they turn on dopamine and they feel really, really good. They decrease pain, they increase pleasure. They are probably as close as you can get to returning to the pleasantness of the womb that you can. I mean, one of the things you guys have to do to understand opiates is you have to find an old movie called Trainspotting, and both look at, you'll get an understanding of how fast and how remarkably pleasant the high is, and it really only lasts very brief, for injected heroin, a very brief time. And it'll also give you a very graphic idea of withdrawal. Now the problem with opiates is turning on your opiate receptor gives you the dopamine rush and you feel great, you're going to do it again, it gives you a lot of other pleasant feelings. But if you take too much, it will stop your breathing. And that's how people die. And the problem is, you need more and more and more of the opiate to get the same amount of pleasantness. But, so you're using more and more, but your ability to keep your breathing going doesn't get any better. So you don't get any tolerance to the effect that turns off your breathing, and that's when you stop, that's when you die using opiates. Relative abuse liability of drugs. People say, well, is this a addictive drug? And so they, actually NIDA has a whole bunch of addicts who rate different aspects of different drugs for them. And
You do a great job, right? The federal government pays you to be like, oh yeah, I really like that one.
yeah, and they try new things that are on the street and say, I give that a 1 for withdrawal, a 3 for reinforcement, etc. But so alcohol, the withdrawal of alcohol is the worst thing. It's the only withdrawal that will actually kill you. Withdrawing from alcohol and Valium will kill you. You're most likely to be hurt by an intoxicated person on alcohol. Okay, people get really, really, really crazy on alcohol. We don't believe that because we know so many people who have been drunk. But if you go down to the jail, if you go to detox, you will see people who are way more intoxicated than you ever expected. But heroin, you might see, it's all 1s and 2s. Opiates are all 1s and 2s. You get very, very tolerant, you get very dependent, you get very intoxicated, it's very reinforcing, and the withdrawal may be the subjectively worst feeling people can have. Okay, people hate the withdrawal. Even though they know they're going to die if they use it one more time, they'll do anything to not have the withdrawal. And even though you're not going to die from a heroin withdrawal. Alcoholics, they say, oh, the withdrawal's not that bad. Well, you almost died. I did? Oh, come on. Find me a case of beer. Heroin addicts, when they're in withdrawal, you'd swear they're going to die, but they're not. You know, it's really not a dangerous thing. It's just the most god-awful feeling in the world, and you will go anywhere to find heroin to avoid doing that again. So, the lucky thing about heroin over the years is that, well, the first lucky thing is nobody figured out how to use a syringe until about the 1860s, in this country anyway. And opium arrived in this country mostly along with Chinese laborers brought in to build the railroads. And then there was the Civil War. And there were more people around this country with traumatic amputations done with a saw in the field than you can imagine. And all of a sudden it was the perfect storm, right? Lots of people with terrible pain, brand new drug that you can give IV. And Civil War soldiers were addicted to opiates at an incredible high rate. And that's where things actually got off and running. It actually led to the entire regulation of drugs in America in the early 1900s because opiates had gotten to be such a problem, and therefore they started regulating prescriptions and everything else. But the issue for us now for opiates in the United States is we have pure sources, cheaper than it's ever been, and between the prescription diversion and the heroin trafficking, widely available, and it seems as though diverting prescriptions, people think if the doctor prescribed it, it can't be that dangerous. You find that over and over in surveys. Or alcohol can't be that dangerous, or it would be legal. Huh? You know, semi-automatic weapons are legal. They're fairly dangerous. Anyway, there's lots of dangerous things that are entirely legal. So we have an awful lot of these things here. The same thing happened with cocaine. Coca leaves were chewed for 5,000 years. Not that big a problem. Then it got pure, and you could snort it, and you had cocaine nasal. It was a problem, but it was big on Wall Street in the 80s. Lots of regular people did cocaine. George Bush did cocaine. Obama did cocaine nasally. What happened that made cocaine a big problem in the mid-80s? the development of crack and the ability to smoke it and get it to your brain in 7 seconds. And all of a sudden, people were much more addicted faster. So there's a lot of drug technology and availability that are a problem. About 100,000 US soldiers were using opiates in Vietnam at the end of the Vietnam War out of 500,000. And people were incredibly worried, especially Richard Nixon, that they were going to bring people home and they were going to have highly armed heroin addicts on the street. What turned out, when you get back to the United States, there wasn't much heroin on the street. It was really poor quality. You had to shoot it up. You couldn't just smoke it like you could in Vietnam. And about no more than 3,000 out of those 10,000, out of those 100,000 people ever took opiates again. So they were all geared up for this. But they didn't have what we have today, highly available, highly pure stuff. So that's a big problem. And that has a big...
So I'll do this case quickly so we can move on, but this is like a classic story. I mean, this is something I hear all the time, right? Young woman gets in a motor vehicle accident when she's 15, 16, 17, gets a prescription for opioid pain medication. Anyone in here who's pre-med and makes it through med school and ends up being a doctor, like, you will see this all the time, right? People come in, I hurt my back at work, I slipped on the ice and fell down and hit my hip, I twisted my knee, right? And you always have to ask yourself, how many of these people am I going to send home with opioids, and how many of these people am I just going to be like, here's a shot of whiskey and a stick to bite on, tough it out, right? Because like we said, the diversion problem is huge. And this is, right, this is where it all starts. You come in, you have some pain, you get some opioids, you go home, you take a few, and yeah, they're nice. If you've ever had something for a toothache, they're lovely. So she started using opioids after she was in a motor vehicle accident and pretty quickly escalated her use. This particular woman lives in I think she grew up in Lodi, for whatever that's worth. Has anyone ever been to Lodi? A couple of people? Man, when I grew up, Lodi was like home of Susie the Duck. Now apparently it is home of like crushing and snorting your oxys. I'm like, how many people from Lodi have a drug problem? Apparently a lot. Lodi is a little town. I can't really believe it. So anyway, she got prescribed Vicodin.
But a couple of prescribers can change even Lodi.
They can even change Lodi. So again, like I said, you're gonna be on the other side of this in not very many years where you're asking yourself, do I really want to send this person home with pain meds? So yeah, she started on Vicodin, switched to oxys when her back pain didn't get any better, and pretty rapidly began escalating her oral use. Started dating someone, started crushing and snorting. She's at a party, it's pretty common, right? She said it was just recreational. She also said it made sex better, which I totally don't believe. Like, opioids do not make sex better. Opioids are better than sex, right? Ecstasy makes sex better, not opioids. That's a take-home point for you guys. So she started buying some extras for her boyfriend because she was running out. Eventually she got cut off, right? Because she's calling, you'll get this too, someone's calling for an early refill. Oh, I lost it. I went on a business trip. I dropped it in the toilet. I slipped in the shower. What are you doing with your oxys in the shower?
I can tell you, I've prescribed drugs for 34 years. Nobody has ever dropped antibiotics in the toilet. only opiates and Valium have ever hit the toilet.
Yeah. Like I said, I slipped in the shower. I was like, what are you doing with your oxys in the shower, right? Really? So she's like, I still have this pain, plus now she's got some other issues. She goes to a bunch of different doctors. Eventually she finds someone who starts her on OPs. Do people know what OPs are? Oh, so that's Opana. So I'll also say this, do people crush and snort oxys anymore? You guys don't know nothing, man. Where have y'all been all this time? You are not going to the right parties. So people do not crush and snort oxys anymore because they reformulated them so that you can no longer crush and snort them or crush and inject them. Now they're sort of like, have you ever seen like a gel tab, right? Now they're kind of like that. You can't crush and snort a gel tab, that's ridiculous, right? So now it used to be everyone crushed and snort their oxys, now the new rage is, oh, like Opana, I'm going to crush and snort some OPs. But as Dean pointed out, this is really freaking expensive. Right? Like, you can buy Vicodin on the street, $2 or $3 a pill, right? So, or not Vicodin, I'm sorry, you can buy Valium on the street, $2 or $3 a pill. Oxys, OPs, like something tasty like that. Going rate? No one knows. Man, no one knows nothing these days. All right, going rate, you're looking at $5, $10 a pill. $10 a pill? This is ridiculous.
Now, the interesting part of this is you can go online and find out the best price you can get in the Midwest for any pill you want.
It's part of the internet.
Yeah, so it might be,
Internet shopping.
you know, some days it's worth driving to Dubuque.
Right, because it's cheaper there, right? So it varies by region, but, so nobody wants to pay that much. You're gonna go broke overnight, right? People are often taking 10, 15 of these pills a day. Really? You're gonna spend like $150 a day? Eventually you're like, this is ridiculous. Why don't I just snort a line of heroin? Which is way, way cheaper, right? And so, exactly, by 18, she's gonna try a line of H. Oh, that's kind of lovely. It's about the same, it's actually a little better, and it's way faster. This is a normal story. I bet I see 5 or 6 of these people every year, okay? This is not unusual. Now I'm on the wrong side to actually push the button. Like I said, this girl grew up in Lodi, like a normal history, right? This is not her, by the way, because I would not put a picture of my patient up on the board. But this is from a photo essay done by Time Magazine following young addicts, sort of in the Midwest generally. So here's a woman who's like baking a little heroin. She looks how excited she is. She's like, yay, I'm gonna have some heroin. So this particular story, and Mandy has actually never injected, right? She's only ever snorted. She has helped her boyfriend inject a couple times. This, again, right, so this is the kitchen cupboard at someone's dealer's house. People are aware of the risks of injecting, right? So people have their own little cups that have their label on it, and you use your syringe, and then hopefully you're not too baked on the floor to remember to put it back, or hopefully like your girlfriend will put it back in your cup so that you can continue to use the same syringe over and over again without risking, right, getting an HIV infection or something like that. Although, I will say, often people inject, it hits them fairly quickly and they don't inject the whole thing, there's a little bit left. It's pretty normal, right, for there's a bunch of people hanging out, someone pull it out of your arm or out of your groin, to mix it with some water, this is called a wash, and then inject it themselves and then put the needle back with you. So even if you have your own cup, you know, if you, sir, have your own cup, just be aware you may not be completely safe. So, questions so far on this? Like I said, this is like normal. This happens in Lodi, this happens in Mass. Other thoughts? No? No one has any question about that. So, I saw this woman, like I said, I see lots of people like this. She's going to MATC, she's hoping to transfer the U, and she feels like this is starting to get a little bit in the way, right? And so that's why eventually she came in. She's like, I'm looking at maybe dropping out of school, I feel like I'm spending a ton of money on this, I need to do something. She wants to quit, she's tried to quit a number of times, but she cannot get through the withdrawal. It's too, like she gets 1 or 2 days in, she's vomiting. If you've ever seen someone in withdrawal from opioids, it's ugly, man. Stuff comes out of everywhere. If you can think of an orifice on your body, something is coming out of it when you are in withdrawal, right? Your eyes, your nose, your barfing, your diarrhea, all over the place. It is just really ugly. And she's like, I just can't do it. And so that's why she ends up
You
coming.
need the toilet in a pail. You cannot.
The toilet is
like
not.
that. Yeah.
Most people withdraw in the bathtub. Like, they just strip down and sit in the bathtub for a couple days and just rinse it all down the drain. So yeah, we talked about.
And you
this.
would think that would stop you, right?
Right, like,
Oh.
you're like, really, dude, I'm gonna like sit in the bathtub because there's so many things coming out of me, but it does not do it. Because you know you can stop that just by texting your dealer, right? It's that easy. So, I guess I'll turn it back over to Dean, we can talk a little bit
You
more.
skipped the last one, I don't know if there's anything there.
Yeah, this
You
is
already,
good. I
you already
just
said
talked
that,
about
yeah,
that.
okay. So well, I think we can just do this as a conversation. So most opiate addicts make the decision to quit every day.
Right, they're like, this sucks, and I'm not gonna do this anymore.
I'm
It's
not gonna do it, I'm not
expensive."
gonna do it. They don't last 8 hours. Most people are using 2 or 3 times a day. I have a guy who's now on Suboxone who did heroin for 37 years after the Vietnam War, except for 7 years in prison. We figure he spent in 2010 dollars, which is when we figured this out, about $11 million on heroin over that time. No, I'm sorry. He had to steal $11 million worth of material to buy the heroin he had to buy over that time, because you only get about 25%. Even if you're a great thief like he was and had a great fence, they'll only give you about 25% for your stolen goods. So it is incredible. Now, who are the people, as long as we're speaking to pre-mens here, who have the best access to opiates of anybody on earth? Doctors, pharmacists, nurses. Actually, pharmacists and nurses have better than doctors for the most part, because you're not dispensing that much. I've seen nurses arrested off the floor for diverting opiates on several occasions in my life. Opiates are really, really good, and you will throw your life away over them if you start.
And that
now,
being said,
the
too,
killer
right,
is,
plenty of people do a couple lines of oxys at a party and never do it
so
again.
the killer is, even though they're that good, still only maybe 30% of people who use them become addicted. But imagine that, 30%, and you have a pretty bad situation, okay? And the problem that's really bad with opiates is we don't know, once you get in that dependent state that Mandy's in, that may be pretty much lifetime. People like to think that this new, younger opiate-using group who looks a lot like you guys, that they're not going to turn out like the heroin junkies of the past. But so far, the evidence isn't looking good. The relapse rate, even if somebody gets treated fairly soon, is pretty high. Now, the relapse rate for heroin addicts is, even if they're on methadone or Suboxone for heroin injectors, even if they're stabilized for a couple of years and then they taper off, is somewhere 85 to 90% over the next 2 years. It's not that high for the oxys heroin snorting group, but it's at least 50% over the 2 years after you've been maintained on Suboxone or methadone. So it's an incredibly difficult problem. And you may remember at some point seeing, this is the ad where they show the egg, this is your brain, and then they
That's right, an old school teen. I don't know if anyone's ever seen this.
This is your brain after, I know, these people are too young. Well, what they never put on there is, this is your brain after drugs. And it may be the case that your brain, if you've done enough opiates, is permanently changed regarding the ability to regulate opiate intake. And we don't know the answer for sure yet, but it's not looking good for a significant percentage of opiate users. So,
All right, what else do we have to say here? We should.
so, yeah, that's the thing I just talked about.
Yep.
And so the treatment is relapse prevention, and this is one where talking to people about what might you like to try, well, you have to do that because it is a free country. You have to be a little more pushy about, you really probably ought to try some Suboxone or methadone.
Have people heard of Suboxone and methadone?
Suboxone is a drug.
No, okay.
Okay, so we've talked about heroin and oxys, and all of them go to a receptors on your neurons, receptors on your brain cells that are called mu receptors. And they go there, and that's what turns on the pleasure, but it also is the part that turns off your breathing. It's also the part that makes pain go away. It's an analgesic place. Now the problem is, you keep banging away at that, you're much more likely to stop breathing. Suboxone is a drug that also goes to that receptor, but it only turns it on halfway. So you don't get a high, you don't stop your breathing, but you also, it's enough to stop the craving. So you're kind of normalized. People can start leading a life without thinking where's my next fix, where's my next fix? That's all heroin addicts actually think about. Until, you know, the few minutes, well, a few hours, well, a couple hours, where they're okay, they're not sick anymore. So Suboxone turns it on partway, and it also clamps in there so hard that even if you got hold of all the heroin in Madison and injected it, it couldn't get to your immune receptor. And that protects you against overdose. Okay? So even if you decide I really, really am going to use it, nothing happens.
Try new things out
Yeah.
on the table. Which of these carries the most or the least risk for me personally? And right, maybe you're like, that's cool. I don't think I'm going to be in that 30%, and I'm just going to do that line because I want fun to try. Power to you, man. Right? I'm totally fine with that. Just so long as you know going in what your risks are.
Now remember, she's totally fine with that, but she's...
I'm not your mom either, right? So.
As I always tell people, of course I'm totally fine with that. I'm the only one getting paid in the room because you relapsed, okay?
It's totally true, right? It's really easy to see.
I'm a pretty jaundiced viewer of this risk. I mean, 30%, if somebody really, go watch Train Spotting and say, would I take a 30% shot at ending up like that? And I'd say you probably would.
Yeah, but again, right, it's all about your odds,
Yep.
it's all about your risk, and what sort of risk you're personally willing to assume in order to use something that's really fun. So, with that in mind, we had a marijuana question.
Yeah.
So, do you want to start? Should I start?
Go ahead.
All right, my take home on marijuana is this. How many people in the room have a friend who's ever smoked marijuana? Oh my God. Yeah, like, I hope everyone, I mean, I don't hope, but I assume, I didn't just say that. I assume everyone has at least known someone who rolled a J, right? Like, all of us know someone. So, most people, even more than alcohol, right? People are under the impression, like, this is not a big deal. I'm gonna smoke a little weed, and like, life is cool, I'll have some cookies, watch a little TV, what have you. It's not a big deal. I guess, again, right, it's all about knowing your risks. So for two reasons I'd say marijuana is risky. Number one, if you or anyone in your family has a mental health history, marijuana is actually very risky. Okay, if you're ever like, God, you know, there's that period in high school where I was really down, marijuana is very risky for you. It really increases your risk of developing something like bipolar disorder, developing something like schizophrenia, going on to have more depressive episodes, right? And again, some people have a strong family history of depression or whatever and smoke marijuana and do just fine, but your risk is much higher. I think the second thing that is underappreciated with marijuana is the cognitive effects. Now, probably anyone who has a friend who's used marijuana, right, recognizes that like when you're baked, you're not at your cognitive prime, right? You're probably not going to smoke before your final. Maybe you did, I don't know, but it was probably not a wise decision if you did so. What people don't realize is that that persists, right? That even after the effects of the marijuana wear off, you continue to have some cognitive deficits. And people who smoke more, right, the longer you smoke, the more you smoke, the more that you're going to continue to have these cognitive deficits. People who smoke heavy in high school or in college, they do not do as well in terms of their GPA as people who don't. Fine, right? That's a risk. Maybe you're willing to assume that, maybe not. But I think that that's something that's underappreciated. The other last thing I would say about marijuana, and then people can ask questions or Dean can chime in, is people always say, right, well, marijuana is so cool, dude, because like you don't get dependent on it. You hear this all the time. No one gets dependent on marijuana, right? It's like you can just like take it or leave it, and so just everyone should take it. Also not true. There are definitely people out there. I mean, I've got a whole slew of people who are in their 60s and 70s, and they are smoking a boatload of marijuana every day because they cannot get off of it. Now again, most people, right, you can smoke a bunch of dope in college, you graduate, it's not as prevalent, it's not a big deal, maybe you have to get a urine drug screen for your job, you're like, okay, I'm all done. But for some people, they smoke it and they cannot get off it. And people don't think about that when they start. Comments?
Well, I think the other, I do think the cognitive thing, people don't realize that when you start smoking for a long period of time, it builds up in your fat cells, the THC that's in marijuana. And so we have fairly regularly people who come into the VA saying are daily pretty heavy smokers, but not the heaviest you've ever seen. It might take 60 days for the THC to not show up positive in their urine. So it's a chronic drug if you're using regularly. And because of that, it has chronic effects, like on the cognition, that they don't perceive because it just feels so normal. Oh no, man, I'm fine. Well, no, what you're doing is you're falling farther and farther behind the people you used to be as smart as in life. So a decade of marijuana smoking daily is very rarely consistent with, well, getting to med school. You're not going to get there. Unless you start off as a guy who is going to be,
Yeah, if you're 2 standard deviations
Yeah.
above the norm, right, and you smoke a bunch of pot, fine, maybe you're gonna be just fine. But I'm not that girl, so
Yeah.
I don't smoke a bunch of pot.
there aren't a lot of people who are in that, right?
Right,
So, anyway.
all right.
Good.
But questions, comments, things that people want to know about, other issues? Yeah, that's it. No one has any questions at all? All right. Well, like I said, I think the take home, for me, and Dee may have a different story, right? If I was your mom, I would be like, just don't do it. But, drugs are fun, right? They give you a dopamine rush, they hit your opioid receptors, and they feel good. There's a reason people do them. Alcohol is the same way. I'm not gonna stand here and say, don't drink, that's not for most people. But just go into it with a risk assessment. If you're the son of an alcoholic, every time you pick up a beer, you're like, is this the way I wanna go? Maybe yes, right? Maybe you're like 50-50 odds are not that bad. On the other hand, maybe no. Maybe you're like, I didn't realize that, and I'm gonna take a break. That's my take home.
So,
But again, I went to a liberal arts college,
the
so.
other thing that happens is that you learn about your odds as you're going along, right? So, if you are the son of an alcoholic and you find yourself drinking more and more, and you seem to be drinking more than other people, and you're the one who says, it can't be Friday and Saturday, it's gotta be Thursday, and then it's gotta be Wednesday, and then it's gotta be, during football on Sunday afternoon, and pretty soon, you're drinking a lot more than the national average. That's why that where you show the person in the top 9%, that has actually got more people to think clearly about where are they versus everybody else. But you start noticing that you are probably in a group of people that this isn't working out so well for. Can you be, stopped for that? No, that's entirely your business. But one of the things that people learn very much too late is sometimes you can't undo what you've done.